Welcome to another episode of Gear Reviews with Phil Choi. Today I'm going to take a look at the Radial Engineering Workhorse Six Pack. If you're unfamiliar with this is what we call a 500 series power rack, also known as a Lunchbox. 500 series racks come completely empty, and the whole point of it is to customize your own collection of gear. You're only allowed to put gear that is specifically made with the 500 series format into these power racks. So you basically have different manufacturers that all adhere to the same format and same standard. So that way for your 500 series, you can have a manufacturer like API or Neve that make these 500 series modules that can fit in any 500 series power rack. The beauty of the 500 series rack is that you can basically cherry pick your favorite pieces of gear and have them all accessible in your rack. Whereas if you were recording through a recording console, right, let's say you were using an API console, everything that you'd record and you'd mix through would have to be through API preamps, EQs, and compressors. But with the 500 series rack, it gives you so much flexibility for recording things and basically mixing and matching to whatever you want in your recording chain. I'm not gonna lie, my lunchbox is looking pretty sad. Pretty slim lunchbox here. I only have 2 slots that I'm using, and I used to have 2 more EQs in this lunchbox, but I actually sold them, and it helped me to buy my curve bender instead. So I think it was worth it to kind of empty my lunchbox out. The reason why I like this power rack more than a lot of other ones out there are just because of the flexibility of the inputs and outputs and just how well designed this is overall. The biggest thing that I was looking for in my 500 series rack was to have as much flexibility for input and output routing. I thought it was pretty genius to have both your inputs and outputs accessible via XLR or TRS balanced cables. They also have this link feature that I thought was pretty helpful. It basically pairs, channels 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6 as stereo pairs, and I thought that this was super helpful, especially when you're working with stereo sources. My other favorite thing about this rack is the feed feature. Let's say you have a preamp in slot 1, and in slot 2 you have an EQ, and then slot 3 you have a compressor. The feed feature basically allows you to feed the output of one channel into the input of another channel. So basically you're able to make your own little recording chain just by using the feed feature. So let's say I have an API preamp, an API EQ, an API compressor. You basically have your own little channel strip just from this feed feature where you're not having to patch things with XLR cables or TRS cables. The feed function allows you to do all of this without any extra cables. You also have DB25 inputs and outputs, and to be honest, I don't really use these I don't really use the 7 or 8 channel either because they're not actual slots. It's just for additional routing. And I'm sure these are also really helpful, but I just haven't really needed to use it because I've just been using my 500 series rack just for preamps and EQs. They also have this thing called an Omni port, and that's basically to help connect additional radial modules. I haven't really tried to use it. There's a whole list of different types of radial modules that they have out there where you can connect to it, and this just adds some more flexibility that a lot of other manufacturers don't have. I don't think this is talked about enough, but also a big advantage is the power supply section of the Radial Workhorse. This unit has a shared power supply of 1600 milliamps, and divided across 6 slots, you basically have 265 milliamps of average current per slot, which is pretty generous for each module. If your 500 series power rack doesn't have enough power, that's going to be a problem, especially if you're using every single slot. Some modules out there might be using more power than others. It kind of varies by manufacturer. And so a really important thing to look out for when looking to buying a 500 series rack is see how much milliamps is in the power supply for your rack. Modules that are not getting enough power are not going to perform how they really should be. And so one thing to look out for is see how many slots you want and then check how much milliamps is in the power supply. And from there, just divide by the number of slots that you have, and then you can kind of see your average amount of milliamps per module. I bought my 6-pack on Reverb used about 3 years ago, and it was like $440, and I just looked again and it's pretty much the same price, so they're not really fluctuating in price. This is kind of one of those things where I don't know if you need to buy it brand new. Like, you can just kind of get one used, and I mean, these are built like a tank. They have a metal casing, they're pretty heavy, and they've never failed out or been acting funky on me. So I've liked it. I've literally had no problems. It just kind of allows me to plug stuff in, not even think about it, and then, you know, if I do have to take it on the go, it's really easy to transport instead of a 500 series rack where it's screwed into your rack. So I like that it's portable. You know, with 6 slots, you can record drums. You could have, you know, 2 signal chains that have 2 preamps, EQs, and compressors. So you can get a pretty nice, you know, stereo chain if you wanted to record guitars or keys or bass or anything else like that. And yeah, I mean, it gets the job done. It's reliable, and it has all the flexibility that you could ask for. The main other competitor that I was looking at for the 500 series rack, I think it's naturally going to be the API rack. And the API rack, from what I remember, it just had XLR inputs and outputs. And so there's no TRS balanced cables, there's no feed function, there's no link function. And so it's pretty bare bones for XLRs. And so if you wanted to recreate like a feed function, like on the API version, you'd basically have to get XLR patch cables so that you're routing the output of one channel into the input of another one. And for me, I just thought it was going to be worth it to not have to worry about that hassle and just get something. It wasn't even that much more expensive, and I feel like it's just a lot more convenient, to be honest. And so that was kind of the main differentiator between the API rack that I was considering, and then, you know, I obviously ended up going with the Radial. So overall, I'm pretty happy, and getting a 500 series rack is a really fun part of, you know, building out your studio. I felt like when I first got it, it was like, wow, I'm really building my own studio. I'm getting to choose my own preamps, my own EQs and compressors, things like that. And you basically get to design your own sound, right? And I think with, you know, different things out there like Universal Audio, where, you know, you're making preamps, you have the Unison technology, you have like these plugins that are emulating these things. Think of that, but this is actually in real life, where you're actually making a chain of preamps and EQs and compressors. And so for me, it just felt a little bit more real about like, I didn't get into recording to like be on my computer and click, click, click. You know, it's like, I want to touch the gear. I want to have the gear. I want to hear how it interacts and like learn all the nuances of these things. And so for me, getting a 500 series rack, I would highly recommend it. It's so much fun in terms of like, I mean, it's called a Lunchbox. I mean, it's just, you get to put whatever you want in it, and that's the fun part of it. So I highly recommend, you know, you can always start small, get the Radial Cube. You know, it has 3 slots, and you can get 3 preamps or 3 EQs or 3 whatever, and you can be off to the races. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop that in the comment section below. I do my best to respond to every question and every comment. And so there is no dumb questions out there. We're all trying to learn. We're all trying to get better at what we do. And if there's any question that I can help answer, I definitely will. And thanks again for watching.